Hello there. Today I will be discussing exactly how to hit the highest numbers possible on Mage. Now, people will tell you, oh, just fireball spam. That's if you just draw circles all day, you'll hit the highest numbers. It takes no skill. That's completely false. Drawing circles can give you high numbers, like always. I mean, with the right tile sets and a good team, you can still hit 100k with that. But that's the maximum. There is one secret, not really secret, way to hit higher numbers on Mage. And that's to actually play the class, in my opinion, correctly, and do a rotation. Now, what is a rotation? A rotation involves multiple different spells. The most common of which are going to be Fireball, as it does the most damage. But occasionally, you will also be throwing in Affliction and Frost, as for getting tile sets to proc. Tile sets and the weakness are the main boons of this. You're not limited by needing a team. You're not limited by a healer like you are with Fireball spam, and how Scott, the person who came up with this specific method for rotation, determined that you need a healer in order to get the max DPS for Fireball spam. There are tile sets for solo Fireball spam, but on average, healing tile sets are better for Fireball spam. Now, what is this secret rotation? It actually differs depending on your casting speed. When you cast an Affliction with the Affinity talent selected, your Affliction will gain a weakness effect. That weakness lasts for 8 seconds. The whole goal of an Affliction rotation is to keep double weakness up at all times. If you're doing your rotation right, you should be keeping almost 100% to 100% uptime on both your Afflictions and your weakness. Now, how do we go about doing this, and how do we know exactly how many spells to put in between our Afflictions? That all comes with your speed. Since half the Affliction time is 4 seconds, because that means that we need to know exactly how many fireballs we can do in that amount of time. On average, the amount that Scott recommends is 7. If you can go even faster, go with 8, but going any faster, you're hard pressed to get good tile sets for that, and to be able to maintain that. 7 fireballs is just around 2 a second, and you can be proccing 3 a second from that. And then when you do your rotation, it'll put up the next weakness, with half the original weakness's time still remaining. What this means is that by the time you cast your next Affliction, and it hits the target, the initial Affliction will have ran out, and the most recent Affliction, besides the one you casted, will be at half its duration, effectively keeping up 100% uptime for your weakness. And weakness is no joke. 2 weaknesses is 10%. Fireball spammers are just losing 10% for not using Affliction. But that's not all. You also get dot damage from your Affliction. And that's the entire reason you don't just spam it. Not only do you keep buffs up better this way, but you cannot stack more than 3 Afflictions. Doing this method ensures that 3 Afflictions will always stay up on the target with the max amount of uptime for each of them. An Affliction rotation in demonstration depends on the tile sets. I recommend Scott's tile sets, which is what I run in his post on the forums about analyzing maximum Mage DPS. On my wand, I put the Start of Combat tile set. It's a Start of Combat rune, Fireball, Affliction. That has very low interference, and it's good for starting, as it'll only proc once at the very start of combat. It's for that initial damage boost to get you going. And then the rest of them are really just variations on Affliction. So here we have Affliction, there we go. Affliction Frost Fire. Affliction 2 per second Frost. Affliction Frost 2 per second. and 3 per second fireball to a second. That's the odd man out. That is your fireball spammer tile set. And the reason that's in there is if you get a 3 per second, 2 per second proc during your fireball spam, that'll keep your tile sets alive and your damage high. It is a very good thing to be proccing that tile set often, as it will get rid of that, at this point, near expiring buff from your whatever tile set procced first. And that right there is the key. It keeps up maximum tile sets, maximum weaknesses, maximum afflictions, and then you're even empowering those afflictions with frost, which not only give you better tile sets, or easier to proc tile sets at the very minimum, but it also increases the dot length, meaning that you have more time to cast more spells. In practice, this is what a fireball affliction frost type rotation would look like. You'll see me use this in all my other videos, such as the ones where I kill the fellowship dummy. And as you see, even though I'm not potted, in all the runs where I've killed the fellowship dummy rather, I've always been potted, as that's a big boost to your damage. However, you can see 10k crits from that 10k crit from that affliction. With high crit rate, and 3 of those stacked, that's the potential for just 30,000 free damage per second. To figure out the exact amount of fireballs you need to do for your affliction rotation, you need to know how many fireballs you can do in 4 seconds. If on average you're casting 2 per second, a good way to figure this out is the artificing, the runesmith site potions. Get a friend to watch your tiles for you, and if you're casting on average 2 per second, go with 5, or go with like 5. If you're casting mostly 2 per seconds but with some 3 per seconds, you're going to want to go to 6 or 7. The reason for this is you want to be a little less than the maximum you can do. Otherwise, your affliction's weakness that you initially casted will run out, and that'll result in a net loss of damage. Even though you casted another fireball, you'll lose more damage that way. And then, tips for practicing this kind of rotation. It's hard to master, as it's more punishing. That's why many mages don't go for it. If you miss even one affliction, that's a potential 10,000 damage just gone, and an extra 5% damage just gone. You don't have that anymore. In fact, the entire team doesn't have that 5%. There's a lot of pressure on you to get those afflictions off. If you want to do an affliction rotation, affliction needs to be done down pat. You cannot fuck it up often. If you fuck up your affliction, your damage just suffers. Whereas if you pop a fireball in a fireball spam rotation, you don't lose that much damage, you lose a fireball. With affliction, you lose multiple fireballs in reality. If we were to talk about it on terms of how many fireballs would it take to get the same amount of damage. Another thing to keep in mind is perfect casts. Now, people will always say casting faster is better, and that is, at least at the current moment, true. The faster you can cast, obviously, the faster you deal damage, and the faster you deal damage, the more damage you deal. However, there is the other thing with Mage called perfect casts. They're signified by that little effect that comes out of the wand. Something like this is not a perfect cast. It doesn't happen. But when you draw it perfect, it happens. That perfect cast is not a set damage increase, which is dumb, but we only figured this out later during Reborn. We knew perfect casts made you do more damage. We've always known this. We just didn't know how much. So back in Preborn, we assumed that it was either a really low number or a flat increase. Something so minute that it's not worth. After getting to Reborn, we got the combat logs, a way to test our DPS. And doing that, we've been able to figure out that a perfect cast is not a set amount of damage. It's a gradient. The more perfect you cast a spell, the more damage it'll deal. You can draw the ugliest spell and it'll do the least amount of damage on average. Whereas if you draw a perfect spell, it'll do the most damage. There is a set number for this. From what Scott detailed on his post, which is a little hard to understand at first glance and took me a few rereadings to fully grasp the concepts, and I still might not get everything he said in there. However, the most perfect cast that a human is able to do would be able to get 10% more damage than just a regular cast. And that is the key to getting maximum damage. That is how you would be able to hit these high numbers. Casting faster is good, but there comes a time when you just can't cast any faster. Either you hit 5 per second, which is very unlikely, or, and this is more likely, you just can't improve past that point because at a certain point you just can't move your body fast enough. And that's where you need to abuse perfect casts. Now, perfect casts are great. I've explained them as this savior of Affliction rotations, the god of Affliction rotations, but funnily enough, it's honestly not as precedent, at least in the Affliction part of the rotation. Affliction does not benefit at the current moment from perfect casts. It'll get the initial damage buffed, but that's it. The dot damage afterward will not do any more damage than if you just casted it as sloppily as possible. Therefore, the perfect casts are dealing with the frost and the fire. The frost, it's a frost. I mean, it's good because you can get 5% from Ice Heart, but at the same time, it doesn't do as much damage, so perfect casts are good on it. Do a perfect cast when you can, and you should be getting perfect casts nearly all the time to all the time, but it's not as important as getting perfect casts on your fireballs. And as you can see, I'm not warmed up, so, as I just logged on, but those are the kinds of casts you want. And it's also the reason I use B method. People call me a lunatic, people call me crazy, people call me thick boy. But in reality, even though shortcuts do allow you to cast faster, for most people, I never learned that way, doing B methods will more often result in higher damage perfect casts. Just because you're drawing the spell how the devs intended it, so it'll do more damage based on the perfect cast system. So, if you really want to hate yourself and cast B method, that is a surefire way to increase your damage. Have fun keeping that up for more than like 10 minutes, but it's possible. I've done multiple shards in a row with B method, and I am fine. Alternatively, you can just learn any of the shortcuts. It's a minute damage decrease to use a shortcut, but in reality, if drawing a shortcut's much easier and more reliable for perfect casts, that's what you go for. 99% of mages will not benefit from B method. It's only like me who benefits from B method, as I have extensive muscle memory on it. If you want to become as crackhead as me, you could go ahead and learn B method. The question is why? that's getting kind of off topic though. What matters is just practicing your rotation. Practice, 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 especially getting those afflictions down pat and recovering from afflictions. Now, what do I mean by recovering? Say you cast an affliction and because you're like me and don't use fucking lend a hand, you miss. Ooh, whoa, I missed. And now I'm missing like 2 afflictions. What I normally do to recover from that kind of situation, especially as it helps my team, there are kind of 2 ways you can go about it, depending on your philosophy about it. You can either do a Fire, Affliction, Frost twice, as long as afflictions get out, it's all fine. Or you could do something like Fire, Affliction, Frost, which might be the better solution there. The reason for that as it is that 5%, or in this case, it affects the entire team. Unless you have 2 scoundrels who immediately get the weaknesses for you, everyone is suffering like it's an unprepared shard for who knows how long until you get those afflictions back up. 2 afflictions being 10% also basically counteracts unprepared as long as it's up all times on mobs, as unprepared is 10%. So you can think of it that way. Now, these types of rotations, as I've said, are hard to master and require a lot of muscle memory on terms of your afflictions, your frosts, your fires. It takes more brain power than fireball spam, as you need to think about what your next spell needs to be, even if it's on a subconscious level. I have practiced my craft for many hours, hit the highest numbers with this method, as shown in my other videos where I get over 100k parses solo. Over 100k is not possible with fireball spam solo. Solo, it is just impossible. The reason for this is just simply due to the lack of debuffs on the enemy and the lack of dots you're putting on them. And unfortunately, you can't really do that with fireball spam. You'll lose damage that way. So that's why affliction rotations can hit higher numbers. Now, putting it into practice is a bit hard. How do you even go about practicing this type of fucking thing? Well, a good way to practice is just first, once you've mastered your spells, once you've mastered your frost, your affliction, your fireball, and you're confident in your ability, a good thing to go try to do is do unpotted dungeons, do really anything you want to while doing solely rotation mage. Force yourself into the habit of doing a rotation and it'll become easier. You'll learn how to do it better. A good practice that I do is the fellowship dummy in there, as it feels so gratifying to kill that thing. And then the thing would be seeing how fast I can kill Lich King. Now, Lich King is, on Uncharted, dies really quick if you have high damage. This is a given, but starting out, your damage is going to suffer with an affliction rotation, as you haven't mastered it yet. You don't know exactly how long you should be waiting, doing anything really. You don't know the exact timings for everything. And that all comes with practice. A general rule of thumb, you should be able to cast your affliction as fast as you can cast your fireball. If you can get to that kind of level, you'll be sitting pretty. Lich King is kind of hard to hit because of his stupid hitbox, but as you can see, even though he got Death Burst off, I was able to kill him solo. 2 more bolts and he would have spawned ads. Now, you won't be at that level. Likely your DPS will drop by 20, 30k when you start. And that's discouraging. It's discouraging to be doing so little with such a powerful method. And it's so discouraging that most people who attempt to learn it just go right back to Fireball. But if you can persevere and learn from your mistakes, learn and grow stronger, you can eventually beat out all Fireball spammers. The top Fireball spammers like King Me, Logan F, there are too many to count. CEO, Athos. They're all generally Fireball spammers. And you'll see them hitting 100k. But keep in mind, when everyone's like, wow, you're doing such high damage, say they hit like 110 on a mutated rat parse, step back and think, how exactly did they hit that number? As 100k is the maximum for solo play. And up to date, no Fireball spammer has solo hit 100k. So, you have to think, what buffs, what debuffs did the boss have to allow that? And that's when you arrive at your answer of the weaknesses, usually from an Affliction Mage. As those groups that have those high damage Fireball mages, who are really prideful on their damage, at least a few of the top tier Fireball spammers are, those groups have Affliction Mages in them. They have what the game has dubbed Affliction Bitches. People who do the job that no one wants to do. Yet it is the most powerful method to play Mage. Affliction methods can allow you easy feats. Let's assume you're on a 15 Mistkeeper. One of the hardest bosses in the game for shards, period. If not the hardest, due to his mechanics. If you're a Fireball spammer and you're doing orbs, if you're not actively doing specific strats, your DPS will tank, and the final parse, after, let's say you do the orbs one time and are able to kill the boss right after, your DPS might drop to 70 or 60. Now, with an Affliction rotation, your damage is still going to suffer, but doing specific strats allows you to keep that damage high. For instance, one method that I'm going to share my secret about with hitting high parses while doing orbs is when doing orbs, hit one of them and then hit the boss with the next Affliction, then hit the next orb and kind of rotate like that. Then after you hit the back orb, go back to DPS. What that'll do is by the time you hit the back orb, it'll be like either red phase or nearly red, depending on your speed. And while it takes thought, depending on if you fucked up your Affliction and other factors, what matters is that you hit all the orbs while still hitting the boss with weakness, increasing your team's damage, and keeping your DPS at least semi-decent. Keep in mind each Affliction can hits around 5,000 without tile sets, so you're getting 15,000 damage per second by basically doing nothing. At minimum, there, it gets to the point where you can keep your damage higher. And that's the power of Affliction. Affliction is such a useful spell that gets overlooked. People disregard Affliction because Fireball does so much. However, where Fireball fails, as in the dots, the weakness, it's what Affliction takes pride in. Being able to do an Affliction and keep that Affliction up the entire time is what makes so powerful. Now, let's go into some strategies for how to practice your muscle memory, as that's just general mage tips. This is going to start the general mage tips section of the video. And from here henceforth, I will be talking about different strategies players use to increase their performance and other such things. First of all, don't be afraid to stretch. There are stretches you can do to improve blood flow to your hands, to your wrists, all that kind of stuff. Not only does that help prevent injury, which is something people are increasingly alarmed about, but more blood going to your hands, your fingers, your wrist, helps you move it faster. More oxygen gets there, you're more energized, yada yada yada. What matters? Stretching helps you hit those higher numbers without cramping, without hurting, without having to stop. So doing just a light stretch before you cast is a world of good. Not only for your health, but for your damage. Next is muscle memory. Now, this one's harder to practice. Your eyes naturally want to look at your spell. When you're casting, you naturally want to dead focus in on that spell to cast it. But the best casting comes from muscle memory. Once you learned how to just on command do a perfect cast fireball, you can just keep doing that over and over again. And the easiest way to improve muscle memory is to just play the game. The more you cast a spell, the more you get experienced with it, the better you get at it. Now, that's obvious, but there are little tricks you can use to force muscle memory. One such is your player journal. Silly, I know. I'm not talking about the spell page. If you put your journal in front of your face and put your wand through it, suddenly you can't see the wand. So you have to draw via only muscle memory. If you do that for, 10 minutes a day, you'll start rapidly improving your muscle memory, as you have only sound effects. Another thing this also does is it gets your eyes off of your spell. Once you can cast with muscle memory, you learn to just ignore the drawing. I know it's tempting to look at your drawing to make sure you're drawing it right. But, like that group right there, that group has a bolter. If you're looking down at your spell the entire time, you're not going to see the bolt right in front of you. And with Affliction, it's even harder to see that bolt, as Affliction, for some reason, obstructs everything in its path. You will not see a bolt coming at you until it's too late. You have to have more awareness. And using that player journal trick to improve your muscle memory, so you don't have to look at your spell, and you're confident in that ability, means that you can better pay attention to the actual battlefield going on. You can make smarter, more informed decisions. When fireball spammers usually die, usually to bolts, it's because they dodged too late or didn't see the bolt. A lot of the time, this comes from just focusing in on their spell at first. They'll blame it on something, but it's usually always just that habit of looking at the spell. Not to say that that is a bad habit. For more important spells, like Affliction, you might want to look at your spell to make sure it actually casts, as, again, fucking that up as repeated in the previous section, reduces your damage and the team's damage heavily. But your main damage spell, Fireball, should just be automatic at high levels. You should be able to cast it while looking directly through it. I'm not looking at my spell, I'm looking at the enemy. One method and one way I cast is my wand is usually far out to the right. It's on the right portion of my screen, beyond what my left eye can really even see. And what that allows me to do is better focus in. Being able to look forward and see your target allows you to hit them better. That is all I'm going to go into detail for now on Mage, Affliction rotation, and if you want me to make another video going into more detail about Mage tips, such as how to hit moving targets more effectively, the benefits of, say, non-lend-a-hand versus lend-a-hand, any such topics, be sure to comment so I can more easily get those videos out. As without any kind of feedback, anything like that, I won't know what you guys want me to cover next. And when it comes down to it, I'm here to teach Mage. I want you to get good at Mage. Hell, I want you to do more damage than I do, so I have a reason to still play. If you can beat me at damage, I suddenly have a big reason to play, as I don't want to be the weaker Mage. I want to retain my position as #1 damage Mage. So, when the time comes, and you use an Affliction rotation to get stronger than I have gotten, it gives me reason to play. And I want to see more mages opt to play differently than the meta. So, I hope you all decide to at least give Affliction rotations a try. If you think that it was not very well explained in this video, I can go into more detail in a follow-up video. Otherwise, take care, and continue to practice your Fireballs, your Afflictions, and your Frosts.